Hello, I want to speak briefly about today's breaking news about the terrorist attacks in Brussels. There's a few angles I'd like to take with this. I want to make it a little bit different from the video I made in Paris because basically the sort of things I could say would be very, very similar. So far, this is a developing story, and as with every developing story, new information emerges. 31 people have been killed, 80 wounded at two attacks at the airport and at Malbec metro station. I visited Brussels 8 years ago to the European Parliament, and it's not a huge city, but the metro system is quite a big system, quite a busy system. So one can only imagine the chaos that has been going on there this morning. Um, it's too early to say which group was responsible, but I think the conjecture that it was Islamic State is very reasonable. If it later turns out to be a far right group or whatever, then I'll amend that. But I think all the evidence points to this being a jihadist attack. And given that Islamic State is the most prominent Islamist group out there, I think it is fair conjecture. Especially given this guy, Abdeslam Salah, was arrested the other day. Whether it's a revenge attack or not, hard to tell. Um, my first thought really is with the victims and the first responders. There must be a lot of people who are going through a lot of physical agony right now, as well as emotional trauma, shock. Um, and I really, really sympathise with those who have the very difficult job of liaising with relatives, saying to someone that their loved one has died, this sort of thing. It's a very, very difficult job, and those people deserve enormous respect. When there's a major terrorist attack, there's usually a lot of scrutiny and criticism of the security services. I'm always reluctant to do that. Obviously, where mistakes are made, there has to be lessons learned. But the truth is, no government in the world, no security agency in the world can be absolutely 100% in a situation where they can guarantee to the public that they can absolutely safeguard society. There's obviously this debate going on at the moment between Apple and the FBI. It's just an example of the sort of debate we're seeing. Personally, I think Apple needs to be a little bit more flexible. I understand the argument they're making, but the truth is we are living in exceptional times, and it's getting this fine balance between continuing with our lives and not letting terrorists do what they want to do and disrupt and divide society, but also recognizing that there is a real problem here. I mean, what European countries are facing is the greatest crisis basically since World War II. And whilst it is important to put things in context, so for example, 31 people have died today in a terrorist attack. Now, you could say, look at how many people die from road accidents or from smoking. There is something particularly emotive about that sort of callousness, human induced callousness, that isn't the same with other tragedies. There's something about terrorism that is very raw, very, I think, pure evil. And that's why it's so emotive. So it's not necessarily the number of people who have died, although each life is precious, but it's the fact that there's something particularly raw about what terrorists do. That is why it is extremely important that we don't cave into becoming a divided society and scapegoating all Muslims. However, I also believe it is extremely important that we recognize what the problem is. And for those who say this has nothing to do with Islam, or terrorism has no religion, or statements like that, you're just being dishonest. It's as simple as that. You're not being honest, or you're being willfully ignorant. And I'm not trying to be confrontational with anyone, but these are the facts. You simply don't have this sort of situation happening with Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, or Judaism. Yes, every religion has extremists. Yes, there are examples of extremists within those other major religions as well. But there is something within radical Islam that is exported and internationalized in a way the fanatics of other religions are not. Not in the same way. The simple fact is, you do not get fundamentalist Christians or Hindus or Jews blowing themselves up to kill as many civilians as possible. You will get bigotry, you will get extremists, and in some cases you will get murder. But I think it is internationalized in a way that you don't see in other religions. Now, to any Muslim people watching this, if you want to interpret that as hatred against Muslims, go ahead. But I would just remind you that the main victims of Islamic State are Muslims. So denying that this is a problem within Islam isn't actually helping Muslim victims of the problem. If you truly care about Muslim victims, you will acknowledge this is a problem within Islam. There's no quick fixes to this. There is an argument that American Muslims are more integrated than European Muslims. I don't think you could quite generalize like that, but I think there is some truth in it. When American politicians say that there's parts of Europe that are no-go zones and they're ridiculed, I think here in Europe we need to be quite honest about the problem. The fact of the matter is, a place like Molenbeek, where this guy was arrested, has become totally detached from, in this case, Belgian society. And there are similar places in Paris, in London, in Birmingham. Um, so to pretend that we don't have a problem with integration is just plain dishonest. Now, that is not to say that all Muslims are disenfranchised from wider society. Of course not. And there will be Muslims all over Europe today condemning this and being as shocked as everyone else. But there will also be a lot of people trying to deny that there is a problem and saying, oh, it's just a terrorist attack, whilst denying the ideological basis of that terrorist attack. Now, that is just plain dishonest. Um, it is also true to say that there is, this has happened in Paris, but there's many atrocities all over the world. This happens every single day in Syria. And because the situation in Syria is so awful, then we've almost become desensitized to it because we can't comprehend the figures from Syria. Some reports say 470,000 dead, so it's astronomical compared to what's been seen today in Belgium. But I think it demonstrates the sort of the sort of impact that terrorism has. And it doesn't mean that we ignore what's going on in Syria, but I think it is a reminder that this really is a global threat. And it is good that the United States hasn't suffered a more serious attack, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. Um, the truth is, there are no easy answers. This is not a conventional conflict. This is not a case of pitched armies versus pitched armies. The toll may be a lot less in World War II, but the situation is actually, in my opinion, a lot more complex. At D-Day, it was bloody, it was awful, but it was straightforward insofar as it was a pitched army against a pitched army. This is a kind of Cold War which doesn't involve standing armies in the sense that it's single cells, sometimes individuals, and they strike and cause this sort of carnage and get attention. And what we have to do is send out the message that we as society won't be intimidated. We're not going to turn on each other. So blaming all Muslims would be the wrong approach because that is exactly what Islamic State want. However, pretending that there isn't an ideological basis for this sort of terrorism is also a problem. That's why, as a centrist, I take a pragmatic step of thinking, of looking at the answer, which is basically acknowledge this as an ideological problem that needs to be dealt with in that way, also from a community basis. In other words, police cooperation with communities, de-radicalization programs, and so on. But we have to understand what the agenda of these sort of groups are, what the agenda of the Islamic State is, and let's not be deluded into thinking that they are somehow freedom fighters. These people care about no one but themselves. They enslave men, women, and children in Syria and Iraq. So nobody should be under the illusion that they have any moral high ground whatsoever. And that might sound like an obvious thing to say, but there are people out there who actually start to believe their propaganda, and that is when the dangerous process of radicalization begins. These people are callous thugs, Um, so we'll leave it there. I don't want to make this video too long. My heart goes out to everyone caught up in this atrocity. Belgium is obviously going to have a lot of post analysis to this. So is Europe. So is so is every democratic country. Um, but we cannot afford for this situation to continue and continue and continue, and to not learn lessons, because it would be a tragedy if it takes terrorist atrocities to wake up to the problem.